Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's GP Strategies webinar. My name is Kayla Rotz, Marketing Manager for GP Strategies, and I am happy to be your host for today's event. If you've joined us before, we are very glad to have you back, and if this is your first session with us, well, a big welcome goes out to you. We have a great discussion planned today on virtual coaching, but without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's presenters, Danela, Ezekiel, and Margaret Bishop. Danela is a coach, facilitator, and leads the team coaching practice at GP Strategies. She is South African but lives in the UK and works worldwide. She has coached internal coaches as well as leaders and facilitated and customized the Transformational Coaching program for over 15 years. Margaret is based in London and is a very experienced executive coach and senior team coach, helping to facilitate many of our transformational coaching programs. Margaret has worked internationally in this field for over 20 years and is also a published author in organization development. So without further ado, Margaret, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Thank you, Kayla. Danela and I are delighted to be with you all today, and welcome to everybody who's joined us. Here at GP Strategies, we've acquired over 30 years of experience in executive and team coaching. Our heritage includes a wide range of research and publications, some of which are shown here, such as creating a coaching culture in large, complex organizations. Over the last 5 years, we have been moving increasingly to coaching in the virtual space. What we'll be covering today will be three main things. Firstly, an introduction to our approach to transformational coaching and why it's so relevant in today's challenging times. Then we will demonstrate how we train and coach leaders virtually, and we've recreated for you an example of this using Zoom. Finally, we will cover the positive differences of virtual coaching. I'm now going to hand over to Danela.
Thank you. So what makes coaching transformational? Well, it is the methodology we use for executive coaching with senior leaders. It's also a program we facilitate for internal coaches and leaders who are interested in helping their people change their mindset and adapt their behavior for organizational change. And the aim of transformational coaching, one, is the intention for the coachee to actively commit to some change, not merely to leave the coaching conversation with a must-do action list. It's also not just to gain insight. Insight on its own is interesting, but it's really not enough. And the insight is the coachees learning what they need to change in themselves. For those of you on this webinar who coach, you will probably have experienced at some point the frustration when, in spite of making clear progress with your coachee, their new insights don't lead to change back at work. And that's not the aim of coaching. Transformational coaching is much more than coachees gaining intellectual understanding. Rather, the coach needs to be competent in helping the individual transform how they think and feel in a way that enables them to behave differently. So our experience shows that the chance of learning and change being transferred back into the workplace is much greater when the coachee experiences with the coach what we might call a real change or shift in the moment. And you'll be able to see this in action in a few minutes. But I first want to hand back to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Danela. So why is transformational coaching so relevant now? We've all been forced to confront the reality of the VUCA world, a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity by the current pandemic. Leaders are having to face up to being in charge but not always in control. Transformational coaching skills help leaders to focus on what they can influence and how they and their teams can make a difference. By taking different perspectives, responding to challenges more creatively, and imagining a new future. I'm now going to hand back to Danela.
And, it's really interesting to consider when coaching and is virtual, positive as well as some drawbacks. And it doesn't seem like in lockdown now we can go and have a conversation with anyone without talking about virtual working. And to be honest, many years ago, I was violently opposed to anything that wasn't face-to-face. However, there are some real positives. And like everything in life, there are also a few drawbacks. No travel costs or harm to the environment, very positive. And of course, adhering to social distancing. Especially in team coaching, you can have immediate diversity across the globe. time zones permitting. And there's a great opportunity to be creative in virtual. I was coaching a woman just last week who was using her young child's bedroom as a temporary workspace. At one point, she just felt stuck in the coaching session and she couldn't come up with any ideas. And I experimented by asking her to wander about the room and become curious with some of the objects in the bedroom. Something in her right brain clicked into action when she picked up a Lego piece. And with this non-rational intervention, it unlocked a lot more ideas. With virtual coaching also, one can split up the coaching time. What about a short session with the client in the morning? The client experiments in real time with her people, and then one can regroup at the end of the day to debrief and embed the learning. One thing I've found is that I do really have to work hard on observing nonverbals, and I can often see only the coachee's face. And of course, that does limit much of the body language.
Some other advantages of virtual platforms that we've observed, we've really noticed there's an interesting effect on power differentials. People often say that they feel less intimidated if senior people are not actually physically in the same room. And you can keep it simple. You don't need to use all the technical functionalities just because they're there. But we do find, like most people, breakout rooms are very useful. And you know, it is, as Danela says, it's a safe place for people to experiment. For example, you know, we recently, Danela and I, used a simple fishbowl technique where a small subgroup was observed by an outer circle, and we got them to turn off their video cameras so they couldn't be seen, and people then feel much less self-conscious. And of course, with permission, you can record, and that's always really helpful for learning purposes. So I'm now just going to hand back to Danela.
Rather than talk more about virtual, we're going to show you how it can be done in about 3 minutes' time. Our transformational coaching program has various building blocks, but today we're going to touch on 2 of them, clear and levels of engagement, although all of these building blocks are possible virtually. We've said a little bit about what is transformational coaching and about virtual coaching, but we'd like to give you a taster of how we develop transformational coaching skills as part of the program. Whether virtual or face-to-face, our programs are highly interactive with lots of skills practices for all. One such skills practice is called a practicum, and we'd like to show you how this goes. Even though for this webinar the skills practice is pre-recorded, it is based on an actual transformational coaching program Margaret and I facilitated. For confidentiality reasons, you won't see the actual participants, unfortunately, but we have instead some of our excellent executive coach colleagues representing the participants. Margaret, who is the facilitator in the video clip, will be explaining the practicum process to the group. Before the skills practice, they had already spent time together building trust and confidence.
So welcome everybody to our Transformational Coaching Skills Practicum. It's a chance for each of you to practice your coaching skills in this virtual setting on Zoom, working on a real issue, and also to observe and give feedback on a live coaching session. So before we start, I'm going to run through each of the different roles we're going to take, and I'm going to share my screen. So can you all see the screen?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so my role is as facilitator is to facilitate the whole group with an emphasis on enabling you, Irene, to learn your coaching skills and to practice, and to offer some regular timeouts so we can reflect on the learning. So Irene, thank you for volunteering to be the coach and going first. David, you've volunteered to bring an issue, so thank you for that. You're the coachee, the person being coached. And we know that the group gets real value when they're working on a live, real issue. So it's so much better than a role play. Andy and Paul, thanks for being our shadow coaches. So your role is to observe the coach and offer Irene some feedback. And for your own learning, use this practicum as an opportunity to notice what the coach, Irene, is doing well, using the CLEAR model as a guide, as well as looking out for what's missing or could be done differently. So Irene, you can call a timeout anytime you feel you're getting stuck or anytime that you want some feedback. And I'll call one in any case after 10 to 15 minutes so we can hear from yourself, from David, and from the shadow coaches.
Before we continue to show you how the exercise unfolds, we want to share the coaching framework we use for transformational coaching. Some of you may know the GROW model very well. We use CLEAR, which was developed by Professor Peter Hawkins, who we have been in business with for over 20 years. The coach contracts with the coachee what outcome they'd like from the coaching, and then provides deep listening to help the coachee understand their own issues better. The coachee then makes progress when the coach explores facts and feeling, what has been tried and what might still be tried, as well as some action. And the coachee reviews what they've learned about themselves and the situation during the coaching as the last step. These coaching questions are aimed more at being a catalyst for the coachee to change their mindset rather than just come to a once-off solution. Let's push play again, Kayla, so you can see how the practicum starts.
So, Irene, are you ready to start the coaching?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, David, hi. It's good to see you and to have this time together. We have up to 30 minutes today. So, tell me, what would you like to get out of this session?
Well, I think I'm probably very stressed about the business as the CEO in London of the division, and frankly, everything now depends on me. That's how it feels. Since the lockdown, companies taking a nosedive, so it's quite a lot to do. I am working around the clock already, and I need some new strategies to lead the team. I mean, I'm really passionate about it. It's a great business, and we've got a good thing going here. But how do I find the right thing to do? And if I'm really honest, I'm not sure I can keep going like this, but I think I probably have to.
That does sound really very difficult and frustrating in lots of different ways. And of course, these are really difficult times, as you say, for most businesses anyway. And what I'm hearing you saying is that you're really stressed, and in fact, probably more than ever before. So that isn't sustainable, as you say. But David, tell me, you've led teams effectively in the past during change. I mean, I know that. So think back to what are the things that you were doing to lead those teams so effectively? What worked for you?
Well, I mean, I have led teams successfully, is what you're making me think about, and it's been sort of empowering them, if you like, setting them the problem and then empowering them to work on it. But this feels different. This is unprecedented. We haven't been in this space before, and it feels that it all depends on me choosing the right answer. So I need to kind of get the right answer and then get them working on that. But that's sitting with me.
So yeah, that sounds tough. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I mean, the reason it is because we're in survive, not excel kind of mode. There isn't the room for the mistake. We've got to make the right decision, and I've got to make sure we make the right decision. We can't burn money at this point in time. We haven't got the money to burn, so get it right. That's what I've got to do.
At this point, the practicum might run on for 10 to 15 minutes before we call a timeout. So we're going to fast forward to the first timeout to show you how we reflect on the learning in the virtual space.
So Irene, we've been running for about 15 minutes now, and you've requested a timeout. So we're going to stop the process and just hear from you, the coachee and the shadow coaches, to get some sense of how they experienced it. So can we start with you, Irene? So what feedback would you give to yourself? What do you think is going well, and what would you like to do differently?
Well, I think I built a certain amount of rapport, and David opened up to me. I asked some open questions. I got him to focus on whether things had gone well in the past. So I was pleased with that. But then I felt like we were getting a bit stuck.
Okay, thanks, Irene. So David, over to you. What feedback would you give to Irene? And if you can tell her directly rather than tell me, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So, Irene, I think you are coming across to me as very warm and open, and I think you're really listening to me, which I appreciate. I also think you're right. I am feeling stuck, and I'm not used to that. But actually, if you could challenge me some more on that, I think it would be helpful. Don't worry about, oh, he seems stuck. I mean, I think that's how I feel.
Okay, thanks, David. So moving on to our shadow coaches. So Andy, can you give your feedback to Irene? What did she do well, and what else did you notice?
Yeah, yeah, Irene, you've got a great approach, and I'm not surprised that David finds you easy to trust at all. You summarised really well, and you showed empathy about the real challenges that he's facing. So I thought that was all great. I I do think that you could have contracted more strongly, though, about what David wants to get out of the session. So that'd be the C of the clear model. You know, where does he want to be at the end of the 30 minutes? And that might help him focus more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Okay, over to you, Paul.
No, I agree with Andy's feedback, Irene. I think you're doing some really effective coaching around the listening and exploring stages of clear. And I thought reflecting back on David's was really powerful. I'm also starting to wonder if you could spot any assumptions that David's making between survival of the company and his team's ability.
Yeah.
So let's press pause and notice Paul's comment about assumptions. We use this model called the 4 levels of engagement when we are working at depth with a coaching client. As you can see, the facts are only the beginning of the story. We also explore patterns of behaviour, emotions, assumptions and values. And as you see, assumptions and values that often drive the emotions and behaviour. In this case, it might be that David, acting the part of being the coachee, holds the assumption that unless he does everything, the company will fail, which drives his anxiety and prevents him from sharing the load with some very capable team members. By exploring what are the facts that make him sure this is the case, and indeed whether they are true, he may change his mindset or assumptions and try a different approach. So let's now go back to the practicum to see where the coaching conversation goes next.
I can understand how difficult it is to leave things to chance, especially during a crisis. But I've noticed you use the term depends on me a couple of times. So I'm really curious about that. And I'm wondering what assumptions you might be holding with regards to yourself, your team, and the whole situation. So that phrase depends on me. Maybe you could say a bit more about that.
I need to think about that one. Yes, I probably do have the best team, or one of the best teams. No, the best team I've ever worked with. I mean, earlier this year they were fantastic with a new proposal on the pricing structure, and that's was hugely successful. I suppose a part of me is a bit of a perfectionist and having a huge sense of responsibility as a leader. I mean, I don't want to burden them with what's my responsibility. I'm the one who's ultimately accountable. Mm-hmm. But I guess now I don't have time to look over everything. And I'm drowning, if I'm honest. And I actually need to let go of some things. But it's kind of how.
Okay, so I think this might be a good point to take another time out. So, Paul, any observations from you as a shadow coach?
Yeah, I noticed, Irene, when you asked the question about David's assumptions, he paused and looked up at the ceiling. So I think you touched a nerve there, and it seems to me worth exploring some of David's assumptions about what he can do to bring his team on board in a collective effort without it being too much of a risk, or that he's letting go in this time of crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks, Paul. I also thought that was a key moment when David paused and looked up at the ceiling, and I thought something had really shifted for him. So, Andy, any other thoughts for Irene?
Yeah, I noticed at one point that David said that he feared that either things could spiral out of control or that he'd have to do everything himself, and he wasn't sure which of those was worse. And I was wondering if that really was an either or choice, or perhaps there's a third option in there, and whether you could explore with him what he might do that was neither of those extremes.
Okay.
Maybe feels a bit more manageable.
So one differentiator about transformational coaching is noticing when a coachee is stuck and seeing that stuckness as actually an opportunity for change. One indicator of stuckness is ending up with an either-or dilemma. For example, when David seems to think either he has to do it all himself or the business will spiral out of control. Other indicators could be a reality gap, avoiding difficult conversations or challenges, and recurring patterns of behaviour. When the coachee does have an insight or light bulb moment, you often see the shift physically. We call it the shift in the room. For example, when Irene asked David to say more about his phrase, "depends on me," David stopped, looked at the ceiling and said, "I'll need to think about that one." And that physical shift was also a key breakthrough. So now we have our final video clip to share what happens next.
So David, what I'm interested to hear from you now is, where are you at now in your thinking? What's kind of going on for you now?
Well, it's interested. I mean, there's something has lifted. I'm feeling more energized. I can see the stuckness, and it's something like admitting it has been really helpful. And secondly, that it isn't necessarily an either or. I mean, I've been sticking myself. So what I'm thinking at the moment, and please feel free to comment, is that I think I need to share that stuckness with the team, and then get them to talk about it with me, and see what comes out of that.
In the interest of time, unfortunately, we need to leave the coaching practicum there. The action and review part of CLEAR continued, and we trust David will have a positive outcome. He came into the coaching session wanting a strategy to lead his team, and left the session learning what he needs to change in his own pattern of doing everything himself. We hope that the recording has given you a flavor of transformational coaching and working virtually. And I want to remind everyone that this is part of a training program in which we train leaders in organizations to coach their people, or we train internal coaches. And I'd like to hand over to Kayla. It's been lovely being with everybody.
Yes, thank you, Margaret and Danela, for this very important discussion. We do have a few minutes left, so as a reminder, if you have a question, please be sure to enter it in the Q&A module at this time. Obviously, our presenters have covered a lot in the last 20 minutes, and there is still a lot of information to discuss. I encourage you to continue the conversation with them beyond today's session. You can see their contact information here is available in the slide deck. I would also like to remind you that the recording and slides from today are going to be available on our webinar recordings page at gpstrategies.com for the next 12 months. So I'll go ahead and jump into some of these questions that have come in. The first one is, in your experience, do leaders that you've trained have enough time in their day to do transformational coaching?
Okay, well, I'll answer that. I think it's very realistic that leaders don't have a lot of time. But we also know that there can just be a very short coaching conversation at the metaphorical water cooler, which we don't have these days with virtual working. So, for example, if an employee comes to a leader and says, "I really am confused about this new way of working," instead of the leader providing a solution, if he just or she just says, "When have you successfully dealt with such confusion before?" that is a coaching question and a transformational coaching question. So it can be very small as well. It doesn't have to be long, but it might be. It might be a whole hour as well if the leader feels it's important.
Yes, and I just add to that in fact, when you saw what you saw in the practicum, all those videos only added up to 9 minutes. And in fact, if you took out the facilitator and the shadow coaches, there's only actually about 5 minutes of conversation between the coach and the coachee. So you can do an awful lot in a very short space of time.
So actually, speaking of time, our next question does address that. Is 30 minutes your recommended time for a coaching session? Additionally, how often would a coach and a coachee get together?
Well, shall I start with that one? I think I'd like to differentiate between an executive coach and a leader as coach. So typically, I mean, we do executive coaching as well. Typically, they would be between 60 and 90 minutes, probably once a month or maybe 6 weeks. And that will be very clear about the boundaries of coaching, and you're coming in from the outside typically. When you're a leader as coach, you're actually wearing several different hats. You might be coaching, you might also have different, more directive styles. You're obviously the line manager as well. So it is different. It can be much more ad hoc. So I wouldn't say there was a perfect amount of time for a coaching session to last. It could be in the moment, in a conversation over coffee, or it could be a whole hour. It just really depends on the context. It's not a kind of either or situation.
Yes, and then the last question that just came in, how would you handle a confrontational situation in this virtual coaching environment?
Okay, well, let me just talk, as Margaret said, first of all, how we train leaders to do that, because it is true that sometimes a leader will get quite thrown with a confrontation when they're coaching somebody. And as part of our training program, we really spend time on the leader, first of all, recognizing this might be a good sign, because when there's a bit of resistance, it means there might be some transformation. It also means that the leader needs to be very present and can work with this in a good way. So anxiety or anger, if channeled in the right way, can actually be quite effective. But it does take some skill, and we certainly give our leaders, when we're training them, that opportunity. And as executive coaches, I don't know about Margaret, I don't look forward to it necessarily, but I actually think it's a really healthy part of the coaching, and it always seems like we get somewhere if there is a difficult moment. I don't know, Margaret, if you've got anything to add.
Yes, I would add. I mean, absolutely, I agree with all of those things, and I think that we definitely also work with the leaders who are training to be coaches about their own patterns and about their own feelings about confrontation as well, because often it's their anxiety about the confrontation that is actually the issue. So it works at various different levels, but it's definitely something as coaches we don't shy away from, because it's all part of the picture. And if they're being confrontational with us, then they're likely to, it's likely to be a pattern in their working lives that, typically needs to be addressed.
Well, it sounds like this is a conversation we could certainly continue. But in the essence of time, it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming through. So we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. I do want to say thank you again to today's speakers, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We hope that you'll join us for future webinars. Registration is available on our webinar page at gpstrategies.com. I wish everyone a great and productive rest of your day. Thank you.